Welcome to the Explainer. Now, if you're studying ancient Indian history, maybe for a big exam, this one is for you. We're doing a super focused review of the early Vedic Age. Think of it as the foundational chapter that really sets the stage for everything that comes after. So let's just dive right in.
Okay, so first things first, let's get our bearings. Where does the early Vedic Age fit in? Well, we're talking about the period from roughly 1500 to 1000 BCE. So this is right after the curtain falls on the incredible Indus Valley civilization, but it's before the major shifts of the later Vedic Age. You'll also hear it called the Rigvedic Age, and we'll see exactly why in just a second.
To really get a grip on this era, we're going to break it down and look at it from 5 different angles. First, we'll set the scene and talk about the people themselves. Then we'll get into their politics and social structure. After that, we'll see what made their economy tick. And finally, we'll explore their religious world. So, who exactly were these people? Well, the story of this age really kicks off with the Indo-Aryans. Now, you have to picture them as a semi-nomadic, pastoral people who settled in a region they called the Land of Seven Rivers. They weren't building massive cities like their predecessors. Their society was tribal, and it was constantly on the move. This Land of Seven Rivers was, for all intents and purposes, their entire world. Now, how do we know all this? Well, and this is the crucial part, our entire understanding of this period comes from one single incredible source, the Rigveda. It's a collection of sacred hymns, sure, but for historians, it's an absolute treasure trove, a direct window into their lives. And that's why we also call this the Rigvedic Age.
So how does a society that's always on the move actually govern itself? Well, you can forget about vast empires or kings with absolute power. Their political world was all about the tribe. It was decentralized, and it was based on community, not on controlling a fixed piece of land.
At the very heart of their political life was the yajna. Now, this wasn't a kingdom, it was the tribe. Your whole identity came from your yajna, from your people. This is a totally different way of thinking compared to later states that were defined by borders and territory. If you remember just one political term from this era, make it yajna.
And the leader of the jana? He was called the Rajan. But don't think of him as a king sitting on a throne. Just look at his other title, Gopati, which literally means protector of cows. That one word tells you everything you need to know about what was valuable and what the chief's main job was. His power came from being a great warrior who could protect the tribe's real wealth, its cattle.
Now, the Rajan didn't just rule by himself. His power was kept in check by several tribal assemblies. You had the Samiti, for instance, which was a big assembly of the whole tribe that could actually elect the Rajan. So his job wasn't always hereditary. But here's a really key point. Especially if you're taking notes, women were allowed to actively participate in assemblies like the Sabha and Vedanta. This points to a much higher social standing than they had in later times. Of course, it wasn't always peaceful. There were plenty of conflicts, usually over cattle and other resources. The most famous of these is the Battle of 10 Kings, mentioned right there in the Rigveda. And this wasn't just some random skirmish, it was a major event that established the dominance of the Bharata tribe, a name that is thought to be the origin of Bharatavarsha, one of the names for India.
And this tribal identity wasn't just for politics. It defined their entire social world. Everything, and I mean everything, was built on the foundation of kinship. It was all about your connection to your family, your clan, your people.
You can almost see it as a set of building blocks. The whole structure starts with the kula, the basic family unit. A group of these families would form a viz, or a clan. And then, a bunch of those clans would come together to form the jana, the tribe we keep talking about. See how it all scales up from that core family unit?
You know, what's really striking about their society is just how different it was from what came later. Socially, it was pretty egalitarian. While the Varna system gets a mention, it only shows up very late in the Rigveda, and it seems to have been based on what you did, not who you were born to. A priest's son could be a warrior's son could be a craftsman. This kind of social mobility is a defining feature of the early Vedic Age.
Okay, so what powered this society? How did they sustain themselves? Well, if you just remember the Rajan's other title, Gopati, you already know the answer. It wasn't about land, it wasn't about taxes, it was all about cattle.
The Rigvedic economy was, without a doubt, a pastoral one. Cattle were the #1 measure of wealth. They were so important, so central to their existence, that the common word they used for war was gavishti, which literally means a search for cows. I mean, just think about that. That one word tells you everything you need to know about their economic priorities.
So this was not a state-run economy with a treasury department. There were no regular taxes. Instead, the Rajan was supported by Bali, the
These were voluntary gifts from the people of his tribe. Most trade was just done through bartering, and land wasn't really seen as private property. It was a resource that belonged to the whole community.
All right, finally, let's look at their belief system. And just like everything else, it totally reflected their environment and their lifestyle. The Rigvedic people weren't building grand temples. They worshipped the powerful forces of nature that were all around them, personifying them as gods and goddesses.
We can actually see a clear pecking order among their gods just by counting the number of hymns dedicated to them in the Rigveda. Right at the top, you've got Indra, the god of thunder, rain, and war. He was basically their divine warlord. And right behind him is Agni, the god of fire, who was absolutely crucial because he acted as the messenger, carrying sacrifices from the human world up to the gods. Their worship was also incredibly practical. The whole point of a sacrifice, a yajna, wasn't about salvation or finding enlightenment. Nope. It was about asking the gods for very real, very tangible things: more children, more cattle, good health, and winning the next battle. It was basically a transactional relationship with the divine, and it all happened out in the open, with no need for temples or idols.
So let's just pull this all together for a second. The early Vedic world was, at its core, tribal, pastoral, and surprisingly egalitarian. Its politics, its society, and its economy were all woven together around the jhana and its most important asset, cattle. This world is a world away from the complex kingdoms and rigid social structures that would come later.
And that leaves us with a huge question, right? If this was a semi-nomadic tribal world, what happened next? What was the catalyst? Maybe a new technology like iron, or a major shift to farming that completely transformed this society into the massive kingdoms of the later Vedic Age? Well, that's a story for another time.